You think you're making choices. You think your thoughts are your own. But what if they're not? What if the loudest voice in your head, the one always planning, comparing, judging, worrying, isn't really you at all? Most people live their entire lives thinking they are the mind. But deep down, we all have moments of silence, moments where something else speaks. It's quieter, but it's deeper. Have you ever had the feeling that there's a witness behind your thoughts? A still presence observing it all, without fear, without agenda? That's not your mind. That's not your ego. That's your spirit. And today, we're going to walk through the veil that separates those two worlds. Because knowing the difference between your mind and your spirit might just be the most important discovery of your life. The mind is ego, the illusion that rules you. The ego is not your enemy, it's your protector. It formed in early childhood to help you survive, to belong, to make sense of a world that didn't come with instructions. Your mind learned to label, compare, and build an identity based on experiences. Praise and punishment became blueprints. What others said about you started shaping who you thought you were. Over time, the ego built a mask, not out of malice, but out of necessity. It believes that without control, without image, you'll lose safety, love, or worth. But here's the catch: the ego can't love itself. It only performs for acceptance. That's why you can achieve everything and still feel empty. Because the mind is playing a game it can never win. And worse, it convinced you that you are the player. The ego is built on fear. Fear of not being enough, of being forgotten, rejected, humiliated. It constantly seeks validation, status, success, and approval. It thrives on comparison. Am I better than them? Or, what if they're better than me? It needs control to feel safe, and it panics when uncertainty enters the picture. The ego never rests because it doesn't know peace, it only knows tension. And it masks that tension through busyness, performance, and distraction. It's not just arrogant, it can also play the victim, begging for sympathy to avoid responsibility. It switches masks depending on what it thinks will help it survive. But the one thing it can't do is love unconditionally, because it doesn't believe you're whole. It believes you're lacking, so it keeps chasing the next fix. The ego isn't evil, but it is exhausting. It doesn't speak, it thinks. And it thinks loudly. It's that constant loop of internal dialogue that judges, criticizes, defends, and overanalyzes. You know the voice. They don't like you, you'll fail, you need to be better, or even you're superior. It sounds like you, but it's not. It's a pattern, a program. It feeds off your past and projects into the future, but it can't live in the present. That's why when you try to sit in silence, your mind revolts, because ego loses power in stillness. It is terrified of now. It either replays memories to trap you in regret, or imagines disasters to trap you in fear. It doesn't want resolution. It wants activity, because silence would mean facing the truth, that you are not your thoughts. And without thoughts, what's left? The greatest illusion of the ego is that it convinces you it's your identity. But the ego is not you, it's a character you wear. A role you play to function in a complex world. The real you, the self, is what observes the ego, not what obeys it. The ego shouts, the self watches. The ego argues, the self listens. And yet, most of us confuse the mask with the face underneath. This confusion creates internal conflict. Part of you wants peace, but the ego needs noise. Part of you seeks connection, but the ego fears intimacy. The ego was built to protect, not to guide. It can drive success, but it cannot deliver purpose. That's why even in your highest moments of achievement, a voice whispers, "Is this really all there is?" That's not doubt. That's your spirit calling you home. When you live from ego, you're always performing. Life becomes a stage where you never take off the costume. Every interaction feels like a negotiation. You can't rest, because rest would mean vulnerability. You fear judgment, not because others are cruel, but because your ego is the harshest judge you've ever known. You can have love, but it feels transactional. You can have success, but it feels empty. You start asking deeper questions. Why am I anxious even when things are going well? Why do I feel alone even in a room full of people? The answer is simple but profound. You've been living from the mind, not the spirit. The mind is never satisfied. The ego is never safe. But the self doesn't need to be. It just is. And the moment you realize this, everything begins to shift. The spirit is self, the presence that remembers. Beneath the noise of the mind, beneath every fear, story, and performance, there is something untouched, something ancient, something real. This is the self, not the self-image, not the personality, but the eternal presence that watches your life unfold. It existed before you had a name. It existed before your first thought. It was there when you laughed as a child for no reason, and it will be there long after your last breath. The self doesn't define itself by memory or emotion. It simply is. It doesn't have to prove anything because it knows what the mind forgets. You are already whole. This presence is what countless mystics, sages, and near-death experiencers describe: a beingness beyond words, radiant but still, pure but powerful. The self isn't somewhere out there. It's closer than your thoughts, closer than your heartbeat. You can't see it because it's what sees. And when you finally stop identifying with the mental noise, you start remembering who you've always been. The self does not arrive like a thunderstorm. It appears in whispers, in the stillness between breaths, in the pause before a decision. You feel the spirit most clearly in moments of deep peace, when you're watching the sun rise, holding someone you love, or sitting in absolute silence without craving anything. These aren't just nice moments, they're glimpses of the truth. The self manifests as presence, not performance, as peace, not pressure. It's the quiet confidence that doesn't need to speak loudly. It's the knowing without explanation. You felt it before, in those rare moments where you weren't thinking, reacting, or strategizing. You were simply being. And in that being, you felt safe, enough, timeless. That is your spirit showing itself, reminding you that you don't have to earn your existence. You only have to return to it. The self doesn't compete. It doesn't grasp. It observes, accepts, and invites. When the ego screams for attention, the self waits, because it knows that truth never has to shout. Here's the clearest difference between the ego and the self. The ego reacts, the self responds. The ego needs to be right, the self is curious. The ego holds grudges, the self forgives without needing to. The ego divides the world into good and bad, win or lose, me versus them, but the self sees unity. It doesn't mean the self is passive, it simply operates from a different frequency. The ego creates drama, the self dissolves it. The ego seeks love as something external to be earned. The self knows love as a state of being. This difference plays out in every area of life. In a conversation, ego listens to respond, spirit listens to understand. In success, ego wants recognition, spirit seeks alignment. In failure, ego blames or collapses, spirit reflects and evolves. The difference isn't always obvious, because the ego can mimic spirituality. But if what you're feeling is tense, heavy, or urgent, it's likely ego. If it's light, open, and timeless, it's spirit. The deeper you tune in, the easier it is to feel the shift. Living from the self doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means you become unshakable. You still feel emotions, but you're no longer enslaved by them. You still face challenges, but you stop seeing them as threats. Peace no longer depends on what happens around you, because it begins within you. The symptoms of living from the spirit are subtle but undeniable. Calmness without needing answers, compassion without needing to agree, clarity without needing control. You stop reacting to every trigger and instead, you pause and choose. You begin to speak more gently, move more slowly, and love more freely. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you are spiritual. Your actions come from alignment, not fear. You find joy in the simple, power in presence, and connection in silence. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to remember that nothing outside you can complete you, because nothing outside you created you. That remembering is the beginning of real freedom. There is nothing to seek, only something to see. The self is not a reward for good behavior, nor a secret reserved for saints. It is your original nature. And though the world trains you to forget it, through fear, comparison, distraction, and shame, the truth never leaves. It waits beneath every thought, behind every breath. The journey of awakening is not becoming someone new, it's shedding who you are not. Every time you let go of a false identity, a mental label, a story you've outgrown, you move closer to the self. But here's the twist, you're not actually moving anywhere. You're just becoming still enough to notice what's been here all along. This presence, this watcher, this silence behind the chaos. You are not becoming yourself, you are returning to it. And the deeper you go into that return, the more your life starts to reflect that peace, that power, that wholeness. Not because you've changed the world, but because you've changed the place you're living from within it. Mind versus spirit in real life, the signs and shifts. You wake up with a heavy feeling in your chest. You don't know why. You check your phone. You replay yesterday's conversations. You start imagining tomorrow's failures. That's the mind, already active before you even leave bed. Throughout the day, you feel pulled between two energies, one that reacts, rushes, and tries to fix everything, and another that simply watches and waits. This conflict is not a flaw, it's the human condition. Most people live with this quiet war inside, thinking it's normal. But what if it's not? What if that tension is actually your soul resisting identification with the ego? Every time you feel inner division, between what you should do and what feels true, that's not confusion. It's contrast. And contrast is the invitation to wake up, to choose differently. Life constantly puts us in situations where we must decide, react from the mind or respond from the spirit. Each decision carves the path we walk. The question is, are you walking from fear or from presence? Recognizing the ego isn't about judgment, it's about awareness. The ego often shows up as urgency, you have to answer now. It thrives on emotional spikes, anger, jealousy, superiority, shame. It interrupts, defends, blames, and compares. It speaks in absolutes, they always do this, you never get it right. It attaches to roles, the good parent, the successful professional, the enlightened seeker, and panics when those identities feel threatened. The ego hates being wrong. It needs to win. It fears silence because it cannot survive without noise. When your inner voice is defensive, reactive, or obsessive, that's not you. It's the echo of your conditioning trying to protect itself. Ego can even wear a spiritual mask. I'm better because I'm awakened. But true awareness notices that too. The key isn't to fight the ego, it's to witness it. Every time you catch the ego trying to hijack your moment, smile gently. You're not failing. You're waking up. The self doesn't arrive with a bang. It arises in the space between thoughts. It feels like stillness, not stagnation. It brings clarity without certainty. When you're operating from the self, you feel light, not in the sense of being happy, but in the sense of being unburdened. You become aware of what you're feeling without being consumed by it. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You move with intention, not impulse. The self lets go without bitterness, loves without attachment, and listens without needing to respond. It's the part of you that pauses before reacting, the part that says, it's okay, you don't have to control this. The self is not passive, it's grounded. It doesn't push, it aligns. You know you're in yourself when peace is present for no reason. No achievement, no praise, no external reward, just a quiet contentment rooted in being. The more you recognize that feeling, the more you realize, this is your natural state. Reconnecting with the self is not about escaping life. It's about returning to it with presence. You don't need to move to a mountain or meditate for hours. The doorway is now. It begins with awareness, with noticing your breath, with observing your thoughts without chasing them. Silence, even for 5 minutes, can begin the shift. Journaling, walking in nature, mindful breathing, these aren't rituals for productivity, they're invitations to remember. Even washing dishes or folding clothes can be spiritual acts when done without rush, without distraction, just presence. The key is not what you do, but how you do it. The spirit enters the ordinary when you stop trying to escape it. And yes, emotions will rise. Triggers will happen. But the practice is in the returning, again and again, to the witness inside. You won't be perfect, but you'll be real. And that's what the spirit honors most. At every moment, you have a choice. You can continue living from the mind, strategizing, performing, reacting. Or you can choose presence. Not forever. Just now. That's all it takes. One moment of awareness. One conscious breath. One silent pause between reaction and response. And in that space, the ego loosens and the spirit steps forward. This isn't a one-time awakening. It's 1,000 tiny returns to truth. Every moment is a fork in the road. Will you act from fear or from love? From identity or from essence? From habit or from presence? The ego will still speak. But now, you'll know it's not you. The self doesn't need to speak. Its presence is enough. And the more you live from that presence, the more your life aligns with what's real, what's sacred, and what was always waiting within you. So, if the mind is the echo of everything you've learned, and the spirit is the truth you've always carried, who are you really? The one who overthinks, fears, and performs? Or the quiet presence behind it all? The one who simply is? Maybe your life has never been about becoming someone better, but about remembering someone deeper. The self doesn't strive. It remembers. And maybe this is your moment of remembering. What if you paused, just for today, and listened more to presence than to fear? You don't need to force a breakthrough. Just a breath. Just a return. Because every time you remember who you are, you bring peace back to the world. If this message touched something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Click like to let this message ripple further. And subscribe if you want to keep walking this path with me. Gently, honestly, soulfully. We're not here to wake up alone. We're here to remember together. And before you go, answer this in the comments. When was the last time you truly felt like yourself? That answer might just awaken someone else.